Hey there, folks. This is Misadventurer here today with the 23rd development diary for my Imperator Rome overhaul mod project, Hegemony. This is going to be an overview of two different minor patches, the first being Alpha Patch 0.7.2, which came out a couple of weeks ago and was too small for its own dev diary at the time, as well as the much larger and more consequential Alpha Patch 0.7.3, which I just released this morning on the Steam Workshop and is now live. So if you want to go and play 0.7.3, especially if you've been following on the Hegemony Discord, link in the description, and know the exciting new features of 0.7.3, feel free to do so. But if you want a bit more context about how 0.7.3's major feature works and exactly what's going on, stick around because I'll be talking about that at length. Now, what am I talking about? 0.7.3 is the final step in Hegemony's very long alpha phase rework and redesign of Imperator Rome's technology system. I was already pushing the boundaries a bit of what Imperator Rome mods have tried to do by introducing custom technology trees themed for the scenario of my mod, which I was doing over the last couple of months in the last couple of major patches, you may have noticed. And with 0.7.3, I have pushed things even further by going back to the drawing board and coming up with a plan for something that I haven't seen any Imperator Rome mod ever even attempt, let alone contemplate, which is a merged technology tree, a combination tree that integrates all of the best parts of the other four trees that I had made before into one unified whole. Now, what I've done with 0.7.3 is delete the previous four technology trees that I'd created, as well as the paradigm system that I was using as a modification of the Bronze Age Reborn CivTech system. And I've merged all of their elements together into one technology tree, which I'm just calling the developments tree, which more accurately represents the interconnected way that technology, culture, and ideas flow from kind of the early classical and archaic age, or I should say the archaic age and the early classical age, to the late classical age and the beginning of the Hellenistic age. Previously, my main issue thematically with the four tech trees was that there was no feeling of interconnection between military developments and cultural developments, even though these things are quite connected. And so a single merged tree not only introduces an interesting new gameplay approach of having different kinds of bonuses all interconnected together, requiring you to think about how you want to progress through using your limited innovations whenever you have them available to advance the tech tree, but also creating a deeper and more realistic sense of progression for civilization, starting from archaic ideas down to notions that represented the progress of Hellas into the Hellenistic age, which is sort of after the time period that my mod is focused on. So this is the ultimate classical age technology tree that probably has ever been created, and I've spent a long time working on it, so very excited to show it off in just a bit here in this video. But first, let me talk for a second about 0.7.2, which I want to quickly just go over the changes from, so I have captured everything in this video. This will just take a minute, so bear with me. Now, first let me hop into a random game and talk about the modifiers that 0.7.2 introduced. Let me just hop into Atenai here. So let's talk about the ruler modifiers. Now, this guy happened to spawn with 0 in Charisma. Not great, but I can still talk about it using the changelog from the Steam Workshop. So basically, with 0.7.2, the ruler marshal now provides plus 2% morale of armies and plus 2% morale of navies per point of marshal. Pretty easy to make sense of. The ruler finesse provides plus 2% national tax and plus 2% national commerce per point of finesse. Again, pretty easy to follow. The charisma, were this guy to have any riz, which he doesn't apparently, would provide, let me pull up my changelog to get this exactly right, minus 2% monthly wages, and it's meant to provide plus 1 loyalty of characters per point of charisma. The loyalty I've actually discovered is bugged and doesn't seem to work from this modifier, a little perplexingly. Loyalty is actually one of the more finicky parts of this game's code, bizarrely, and I'm trying to fix this. I will try to fix it in a future patch. I may change what this part of the modifier does, but for now, what it's meant to do is provide 1 loyalty of characters per charisma point. for now that doesn't appear to work, but other sources of loyalty do work, sort of, so I'll get back to that later. But I've spent so much time on 0.7.3 that I wanted to delay things further trying to fix this loyalty problem. So just wanted to note that this is a known bug, that the loyalty bonus from Charisma doesn't seem to work correctly. I'm working on it. Lastly, Zeal is providing +2 diplomatic reputation per point of Zeal, as you can see there. So 10 diplomatic reputation from the 5 Zeal. Now, along with these ruler modifier changes, the parties in polyarchies and democracies and oligarchies also provide similar, in fact, they're the same modifiers, scaled to be the equivalent of 5 from the ruler. So because this guy is a stratocrat, the stratocratic party is in power and is providing plus 10% morale of armies and plus 10% morale of navies. So again, this is the equivalent of having 5 martial, and they're providing this independently of the martial stat of the ruler. So this guy, and because he has 4 martial and because he's a stratocrat character, he and the party are collectively providing 18%, with 8% coming from him and 10% coming from the party. If he had the same stats and was a Democrat, for example, then we'd only be getting 8% and not the 10%. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. I probably could have explained that more clearly, but I think you get what I mean. The plutocrats are providing plus 10% national tax and plus 10% national commerce. Again, it's the 2% times 5. Democrats are providing, again, it's minus 10% monthly wages, and it's meant to be 5 loyalty of characters. I will see if I can fix this later, but for now it doesn't seem to work. This one might work. I'm actually not sure if the Democrat Party modifier works or not, but I will test that in the future. This is a big mod, so there's going to be some technical mishaps now and then, and loyalty is very difficult to wrangle into working. I've tried mightily, but I will continue trying to fix it going forward. Finally, the theocratic faction provides plus 10 diplomatic reputation when they're in power. So you get the idea. Previously, I wasn't really sure what the faction and power modifier should be, and this feels pretty good where they're providing the attribute equivalent from the ruler of 5 to represent how the party is focused on this attribute and would provide similar bonuses. It also makes sense that you'd have military advantages when the stratocrats are in power, or you'd have dip rep advantages when the theocrats are in power. Incidentally, this is not a 0.7.2 change, but one other change in 0.7.3 that actually works really well with these changes specifically is a change I made to diplomatic reputation, where it now provides the, obviously, sort of opinion bonuses or the chance of accepting a diplomatic sort of action bonuses that they provided before, but it also now provides an economic bonus. It provides an export and import value bonus of 9%. Well, what I should say is it provides a bonus of 0.5% per point, as it were. So if you had 1 diplomatic reputation, you would be gaining 0.50% export and import value, and you'd be gaining 1% tribute income. So that with 18 dip rep, we're looking at 9% export and import value and plus 18% tribute income. Now, these values aren't, game-changing, but I like the idea that diplomatic reputation as a stat strengthens a commerce economy, because something that Imperator Rome struggles to really represent, and my mod is also struggling to represent because I have to use Imperator Rome's limitations while working on my mod, is the idea that a commerce economy requires you to have some level of diplomatic standing. Really, the only way that the vanilla game captured this was with AIs refusing to trade with you because you had too high aggressive expansion. But that was inconsistent, and honestly, with my mod removing aggressive expansion, that system was no longer working anyway. So this is my workaround, where instead of a negative economic effect from not having good diplomatic reputation, there is now a positive economic effect from having good diplomatic reputation. So you have a greater incentive to raise your dip rep, even if you're not really focusing on diplomacy in your particular campaign. Now, having said that, the last thing to note concerns the research, the research modifiers. So the research levels are what are actually increased whenever you level up your different research from your research progress. You know what I'm trying to say. And let me go ahead and quickly give myself some tech levels for showcase purposes. Now, what I've done with the research level modifiers may be a little controversial, but it has been in my mod for a few weeks, because this came out in 0.7.2, and no one has complained yet about this, so hopefully people see the vision. But this new system also is very much designed with the new merge tech tree in mind with its balance changes, so let's talk about it now. So first of all, with each level of research for military research, you're going to be gaining plus 0.25% research rate, as well as 1% increased fort maintenance, army maintenance, and navy maintenance. I'll talk about the implications of these modifiers in a moment when I get through all four. For cultural research, it's plus 0.25% research and 1% reduced global monthly food modifier. For economic research, you're looking at plus 0.25% research and plus 1% monthly wages for characters. And for religious research, plus 0.25% research and plus 0.01 monthly cult influence. In fact, now that I have religious research level 1, you can see in my cult influence religious research plus 0.01. So it does work. This part does work. And the idea here with these four modifiers is I want the gaining of tech levels to have some sort of trade-off. Now, I don't think there's any strategy where purposely reducing your own tech gain rate is a good idea, and I haven't really designed these with that in mind. Rather, this is essentially one way that Hegemony attempts bravely to implement a form of difficulty scaling to Imperator Rome. My experience with this game, and I think everyone's experience with this game, is that the early game is almost without exception always the hardest part of the game. Once you have your build and you basically work out your strategy and get going, things tend to get easier and more relaxing over time, which is fine, right? Obviously, I've got over 1,000 hours in this game. I clearly am fine with that kind of trade-off, but I think that there is definitely a phenomenon of people kind of just getting bored with long campaigns because there's just not really any feeling of difficulty in the late game in a way that's not artificial through events and whatnot. So what this system is doing is it's providing a slowly and naturally scaling difficulty increase as the game goes on. As you gain research, the core parts of your... And I've designed all these, by the way, with things that are safe to have increase essentially perpetually. So, for example, instead of having a morale reduction, which would eventually make all warfare impossible, having it be maintenance, having it be wages, having it be food. These are things that you almost always have ways to supplement, right? You can always find ways to make more money. You can always find ways to get more food. You can get a lot of food from trading, for example. But these do create pressures on you that grow and grow and grow, and they grow very slowly. 1% per point of the research level is honestly very, very unintrusive, and hopefully this does create a slight and noticeable but not overwhelming sense of difficulty increase over the course of a game as you increase your research. And monthly cult influence, this is actually capturing my original vision of cult influence better than what my religious developments tech tree was doing. The old religious developments tech tree was trying to capture this idea that as you develop religious ideas, the cults get stronger. And because I have now merged all the tech trees together into one merged tree that we'll look at in a moment, this idea of cult influence rising directly from the religious research development, I think captures this idea more cleanly than having techs in the religious development tech tree force you to get more cult influence. Now, you can also get more cult influence from doing that guide the cults action that I talked about in the previous dev diary. That's not been changed, but cult influence now does grow more and more over the course of the campaign to represent the development and strengthening of cults. As during the Hellenistic Age, I think it'd be fair to say, the Hellenic world experienced more and more religious power in their societies. There was a greater and greater sort of consolidation and empowerment of religious cults, and this kind of formed the basis of the sort of hero cults and the kind of god king style, Eastern style cults that the successor states were really known for. So I think the idea of cult influence becoming more and more slowly and steadily a problem, both because it's growing your cult influence number, but it's also increasing your cult influence gain, right, from your research rate. I think that captures the idea of the development of cult influence over the course of the classical age, which is what I was trying to do the whole time. So I'm actually really happy with this specific part. Now, all four of these also provide a 0.25% research boost per level, which means with level 1 of all of them, and with each time all of them increase by 1 more rank, you're looking at a 1% research gain with each sort of all 4 going up by 1, if that makes sense. So you're not always going to get, because I just cheated to give it to myself, you're not always going to get all of them leveled up at the exact same moment, but you're going to typically see them all level up around the same time, if not exactly the same time. So with that noted, this very slow research gain will also help increase the rate of gaining techs. Now, the way that I've rebalanced research in 0.7.3 already strengthens your research ability quite a bit. Atenai, for example, is starting off at its 100% CRC, which means you're gaining about 1% progress per month, so that's about 100 months. And there's going to be a number of ways to increase maximum research capacity, some of which I'll talk about in a moment in that merge tech tree. But there's also going to be priorities, policies, and laws, which I'm still working on, that will also let you increase your maximum research capacity more temporarily. So some of those other mechanics and systems are going to be coming out in upcoming 0.7.x alpha patches as I, again, close out the alpha and prepare for 0.8 and the beta, which is coming in the future. Now, having said all that, I think that basically sums up my overview of 0.7.2. Let me check and see if there's anything else that I missed. Doesn't look like it. I also removed the paradigms in that patch, but that was in preparation for this patch, so I will not talk about that too much. I guess one more thing to note is I made some minor adjustments to the Thracian chiefdom flags. I basically just changed them to the animal icon at sort of full size as opposed to having the Odrysian axe hanging over, which I thought was a cool design, but it was a little goofy, I felt, and didn't quite feel kind of grounded enough. So it's a very slight thing, but they're still going to change their design into the colorful version when you do the independence action. I'll work on this more in the future, but this is a kind of a side thing. I don't want to get too distracted from the stuff that most players will care about, which is going to be, look at that transition, the new merged technology tree. Let's go ahead and start looking at it now. So it lives up here in the military research category as all of these different tabs. Note, select M research, that means military research. I tried for a long time to get this to kind of float over here without any one tab selected or all selected. It couldn't work. I couldn't get it to work. This is very hard-coded to expect for tech trees because that's how the vanilla game works. So in order to make this marvel of technology of a single merged tech tree from Imperator Rome possible, I had to make some compromise. So selecting military research opens it up, and here it is. And as I zoom all the way out, I can get the entire thing, because I've actually changed the zoom levels, just about squeezed into frame all at once. Okay, so there's a lot going on here, and while at first this may look like not the most, sprawling tech tree you could have ever seen, I actually previously had attempted to make a 300 tech merge tech tree for this patch, which was so enormous that it basically caused the game to crash when I tried to open it. So I had to scale things back, and with this tech tree open, the game is it's noticeably a little technically impacted, and I am playing on a very strong computer. So I wanted to limit the technical ruin I might bring to people's hardware by having a super gigantic tech tree. And honestly, this tree with its 100 technologies, it is larger than any of the individual 4 tech trees, and it basically represents a best of combination with the best and most impactful technologies, all of which I basically redesigned using basically entirely the names from my previous versions of the techs, as well as modifiers that all feel strategically powerful. So my goal here is that every single technology should feel viable and should feel important for most strategies. Now, strategy by definition is about the choice to do or to not do certain things. So I don't imagine that every single strategy will need all 100 techs, but with 100 techs, that means 25 levels of these research levels to get all 100 of them. Unlike previous tech trees I've designed, there are no trade-off choices where you have to pick one or the other. All of these can be gotten, so you can spend 100 innovations to get all of the developments by the late game. And I basically balanced these modifiers that I talked about earlier around the idea of you hitting 25 levels, and then from there, things are just kind of a downward slope of collapse from greater and greater negatives. But by that point, if you're struggling with these negatives, I don't know how he made it to the late game at that point. But putting that aside, let's talk about the structure of the merged developments tech tree. From now on, I'm going to try to refer to it as the developments tree, because instead of military cultural developments, it's just straight up developments. So first of all, the basic structure of this tree is that it has 7 loose sections that are, as you can see, extremely interconnected. One of the main goals of this tree for me was to really try to interconnect everything as much as I could. And let me tell you, part of why this took so long to make is that designing custom technology trees is very finicky. You're basically fighting against the game, trying to cause your tree to render as a giant jumbled mess and not in the structure that you've planned for it. So I had to go line by line, tech by tech, linking all of these technologies together very, very slowly and carefully to get this to appear as it is. It may also look at first as though this is just kind of a jumbled mess, but this tree, and this is one of the most proud parts of this for me as a tech tree designer at this point, is entirely horizontally symmetrical. Every single tech on this tree is mirrored on the other side down the middle, 1-to-1. Now, the modifiers aren't mirrored. Some of them do have some parallels that I'll talk about. This is another cool thing, is that the horizontal symmetry of the tech tree isn't just visual, but there are some sort of design elements that are mirrored on both sides. That's not, of course, the point of it, but the structure of this tech tree is meant to be symmetrical. And part of that comes down to that sort of sectional formatting. So let me talk about that now. The central tech, and probably the first one you may want to get if you were to just get one tech, is Fratrea. Now, I will also note that I've not designed the descriptions for all of these techs. Writing the descriptions takes an enormous amount of time, and I want to really get the descriptions exactly right tonally. So I am holding off on the descriptions for now. Those will come in a later patch. But the names and the modifiers are all 100% finished. So I will try my best to describe what these texts represent more informally. I don't have my own descriptions to read, so this won't just be, reading time with Misadventure like a lot of these tech tree overviews have tended to be. So Fratrea, which if you remember, I don't know how you would know this, but Fratrea basically represents the family, sort of the interconnected web of families at the center of any classical Hellenic city-state. And what it does as a tech is it provides plus 10% native culture polites happiness, that's your citizen happiness, and +1 monthly authority. And this sort of central set of technologies is really focused on polites, right, your citizens, which are the most important pop type of your country. Remembering that polites are providing tax, they're providing trade routes, they're providing manpower, they're providing research, and they're providing splendor level in your city-state. And then to the left of the right, you have your land and sea warfare categories. We've got Hoplon with +5% army morale recovery, +5% levy size multiplier, and then +5% hoplite, discipline, offense, and defense. By the way, levy size for everybody has been reduced 10%. I think it was previously 25 or 30%. You're now going to be climbing back up to your full levy size possibility with technology. And there are going to be some other ways to get levy size in those other systems that I'm working on, right? Your priorities, policies, and laws. But levy size is now meant to be something that you see some growth over the course of your campaign instead of starting off with gigantic armies from the beginning. Now, Athenai, as a large nation, does actually have a fairly large starting army of 16 pops, or 16 units, but we're not seeing the previous, sort of 40, 50 unit armies, which are not necessarily inaccurate to the scale of some of these battles, but this is a bit more this is a bit more realistic, or kind of more reasonable, and things will improve, obviously. You can, of course, get your first 5% from Hoplon right away. Over here is the Lasaporon with +5% Navy morale recovery, +100% naval range, and then +5% Tri-Race morale, offense, and defense. Naval range, by the way, has also been rebalanced, with Athenai starting off with only, I think, 250 naval range is the max to start with. So +100% would be 500 naval range. So with 250 naval range, Athenai can basically reach around the northern Cyclades area and they can reach a bit into the area over here by, I can never remember the names of anything, the area south of the Oboia Island, but they can't reach super far without suffering some attrition. So Atenai in particular may want to get some naval range boosts. But once you are getting a couple different naval range modifiers, once you're at like 500, you can reach around the Aegean pretty far, and then any more bonuses give you basically full access to the entire Aegean theater. And incidentally, you can actually get naval range bonuses fairly quickly with Thalassoporon, and then with enemies down here, which we'll talk about more later. And of course, there's going to be some other things like priorities and whatnot that provide naval range, working on those more in the background. Now over here to the left further, you have the first Adastoi bonus with Adate, +1 pop realignment speed, and +10% native culture Adastoi happiness. It's mirrored over here by Barbaroi, can't speak, with +1 pop assimilation speed and +10% native culture Metoikoi happiness. By the way, I've not made a mistake with native culture, so these happiness modifiers are specifically for your integrated native culture population, because that's who your developments are going to be benefiting, not wrong culture or wrong culture group. Now this is important because Atenai, for example, is actually quite culturally diverse. There are a ton of subcultures living in Attica that are in the same culture group as the Adynians, but are not actually considered native culture. And so these happiness bonuses are a bit more measured because they're only going to be boosting your native culture, who is your best culture to focus on. But this design change from my previous tech trees of having all of the pop happiness modifiers be global further incentivizes a need to want to assimilate people to be your native culture. Finally, we've got Helis Gome, which increases enslavement efficiency by +5% and increases national Dwaloi output. Now, with the slaves, the Dwaloi, they actually gain output for their first couple of techs as opposed to gaining happiness. And then they gain happiness later, whereas other types of pops gain output later. This is to represent that Dwaloi are most useful to you for their output, and their happiness is kind of a secondary consideration, because Dwaloi, like in the vanilla game, don't actually change their output based on happiness. They always provide 100%, their output is always counting their happiness as if they were at 100%, basically, because they're Dwaloi, right? That's how that works. So it didn't make as much sense, because happiness increases output indirectly, and then output increases output directly, to have Dwaloi, who always have 100% output, have happiness boost, which only really affects their unrest contribution and some other modifiers early on. So that's the idea with that. Then over here, we've got Techne, which is -10% Navy maintenance cost, and then +10% native culture Thetes happiness. Again, remember, Thetes are your sort of craftsmen who are mostly providing some extra, I'll just show you here. Look at that, I can just do that. They're providing ship recruit speed, base resources, and output, and a monthly food modifier bonus. So let's remember, by the way, that the basic way that these different pop types are balanced is that polities are in the middle. They're providing equally to a commerce economy or a tax economy approach, and they're providing manpower and research. Adastoi are providing more tax bonuses, and they provide pop realignment, because they are trying to sway their communities to follow the regime, because they're the Adastoi, they're benefiting from the regime, they don't want it to change, whether they're Adastoi in a democracy, in an oligarchy, or likewise. So they're providing a pop realignment bonus locally. In fact, I can show you that really quick. You can see that pop realignment speed down there. Metoikoi are providing no tax economy bonuses, but they are providing those commerce economy bonuses. They're providing more trade routes, as well as migration attraction for the tile, as we have talked about previously. And then, if you recall, Dwaloi essentially act as a support pop type for a tax economy. They're providing more tax bonuses, as well as local food production, whereas Thetis are providing a support role for commerce economies. They're providing more local resources, which you then sell in a commerce economy. And this, they're also providing a food bonus for the tile as well. And it should be noted, by the way, that even if you're not focusing on Dwaloi and the food production that they bring, because in this mod, Unlike in the base game where most food comes from terrain, in this mod, most food is coming directly from Dwaloi, so most of your food is coming from your slaves. But you can also import food. If you recall, I did this big trade good overhaul, and you can import lots of different kinds of resources as food, which your commerce economy will be suited for, because the commerce economy bonuses tend to be for trade routes, not just for commerce modifiers. So more trade routes also means more food trade routes that you can set up. So I've tried to set it up so that all the essentials, right, money and food, are possible with both a tax economy where you are producing your money locally and producing your food locally, and a commerce economy where you're bringing in money through commerce and you're bringing in food through commerce. So hopefully that makes sense. So with this design in mind, most of your tax economy bonuses are going to be found over here, where you have your tax economy centered Adastoy and your tax economy supporting Dwaloi, whereas your commerce economy bonuses will be found over here with your commerce economy centered Vetoikoi and your commerce economy supporting Thetis. And then you have obviously your politis who are in the middle and provide a number of bonuses that are more mixed. And you've got your warfare, both land and naval, on either side of the politis, because both Adastoy and Metoikoi provide manpower, as do politis, of course, and they're both involved in warfare. Whereas with the Adastoy, they're more focused on the traditional land warfare of Hellas. Metoikoi are more about naval warfare, so it kind of makes sense the way this is all structured. So let's just start going through the different layers. Now, to start in the middle, Politeia comes from Frateria and unlocks the Buleterion city building, which I'll look at in a moment. Also increases everyone's monthly ambition by 0.25%. And by the way, most of these techs are providing 2 or more modifiers, so with 100 techs, they're not all just providing one single modifier. Politeia is also providing plus 5% native culture politis happiness as well. As for the Buleterian city building, that is going to be over here. That is the building that provides a city, and you can build one in it per city, plus 25% state alignment happiness. So this is happiness for being of the same alignment as the country. It's an expensive building, but one other thing I've done, which I've known there's a lot of changes in 0.7.3, is I've changed all of the costs of the buildings. So now smaller buildings cost 500, or excuse me, cost 100 gold. These two are larger buildings. So smaller buildings that you can have up to 5 per city cost 100 gold. Larger buildings cost 500 gold. You can see, actually you can't see because these are all not allowed. They all require different techs. But they would cost 500 gold if I could unlock them. I guess I actually can unlock it. Let me go ahead and just quickly grab Politeia. There we go. And by the way, you can see the +1 authority from Frateria up there, so that does work. Now I can build one of these, and it does cost 500 gold to build. Of course, it's up here on this upper row, so I got confused. But the granary building and the gymnasion both are also larger buildings. They don't have any tech requirements, though. Right, so getting back to it, on the middle row, to the left of Politeia, you've got Logisticos with minus 10% fort maintenance, a very important technology for your economy, as every city counts as a fort. So if you've got more than one city, you're going to have a lot of fort maintenance to worry about. This requires both Frateria and Hoplon. Then over here is Thorioi, which increases control and dip range by 100%. By default, everyone's dip range is fairly large, but is, in my mind, realistic. So Athenai, with their central location, is able to reach basically all of southern Hellas, and I think probably all of the islands. All of these relationships are coded in, so they would exist whether or not you could reach them. But let's see, is there any effect on this? You can still interact with people that are outside your range when they're your relation already. Okay, that's good to see. But like Athenai can't reach Macedon at the start, for example, until they get some dip range. With the plus 100% dip range, everyone can basically reach everybody in the Aegean Theater, except for people that are like really, really far away, like Rokyra or some of the Ionians. So, moving along, coming from Hoplon is Aspires with plus 0.50 morale of armies and plus 10% hoplite defense. This is paired with Dorata, which also comes from Hoplon, plus 0.50 morale of armies, and plus 10% hoplite offense. So these two together are going to strengthen your armies and your hoplite in particular. Over here, they are mirrored by Hippo Zomata with plus 0.50 morale of navies and plus 10% tri-raise defense, as well as Embola, plus 0.50 morale of navies and plus 10% tri-raise offense. You can sort of see I've tried to create that symmetry when it makes sense. Moving along, under the Arete section, we have Sofrosine with minus 10% monthly wages for characters and plus 5% native culture Adastoi happiness, as well as Time, plus 25% army morale recovery and plus 5% native culture Adastoi happiness. Right, so over here on this side, you've got Thalamioi with plus 25% navy morale recovery and 5% increased native culture Metoikoi happiness. And then Prostatis, plus 5% foreign culture happiness and plus 5% native culture Metoikoi happiness. Finally, with the further edges of the tech tree, there's Georgia with plus 5% global monthly food modifier and plus 5% national Dwaloi output. Again, remember Dwaloi have output bonuses at the start, not happiness bonuses. And then there's Paramone with plus 0.10 provincial loyalty and plus 5% national Dwaloi output. This is then mirrored by Demiurgos with plus 2 capital import routes and plus 5 native culture Thetes happiness. Remember, plus 2 capital import routes basically means 1 more surplus bonus for your capital. And then Napogoi with plus 0.05 monthly ship repair at sea and 5% increased native culture Thetes happiness. This basically is the equivalent of having, it's like, I think half the strength of having a ship be in port, because I think it's plus 0.1 when it's in port. The ship repair at sea is a little hard to make sense of, but this will allow you to use your ships out in the waters without having to bring them back to port quite as often. Now, going down to the third row, let's continue going from the center, because I think this makes it the easiest to make sense of. And again, this tree is very complexly connected, so I don't blame you if you get a little bit lost. I'll try to go as slow as I can here. Starting off, we have some gods. We've got Zeus, who's providing plus 5 loyalty of characters, which should work, unlike the other loyalty modifier from earlier, because this is from a tech tree, and plus 5% native culture Politis happiness. Then the other god over here is Apollon with plus 10 diplomatic reputation and plus 5% native culture Politis happiness. Moving along over here is the Phalanx tech with 20% increased hoplite discipline and with Siloi. And I should also say that Phalanx is coming from both Dorata and Aspides, that's your spear and your shield. Siloi is coming from either Logisticos or Aspides because it is requiring either the sort of military craftsmanship of Aspides or the sort of idea of Logisticos. Siloi, of course, are the sort of light troops that support hoplite, and this tech is increasing your morale for your minority of Toxitae, Akontestai, and Svendonatai. And if you recall, these are small parts of anyone's army, but they are still a part you shouldn't overlook as they support your hoplite. And then over here is Addis, who is coming from Time or Dorata, right? Either your sort of raw offensive power or your idea of honor, Time. Addis is providing minus 50% assassinate cost and minus 50% foreign assassinate cost, so some character interactions. I've tried to make many of these character interaction modifiers texts that are not required to move through with no other alternatives, because I know that not everyone will use these character interactions all the time. So I've tried to de-emphasize their centrality in the tech progression routes you can go through. Next to Addis is Euthina, which provides plus 5% native culture Adastoi happiness and minus 50% payoff veterans, that interaction you can do to reduce someone's power base. Next to that is Hera, with minus 50% smear reputation cost and minus 50% inspire disloyalty cost. Hera, of course, coming from Paramone and Sofrosine. Paramone, by the way, basically means the status that slaves have of being like the property of their owner, and Sofrosine meaning self-restraint. So these two ideas lead into the idea of Hera, this goddess of marriage and sort of duty above all other things. Yeah, I think it kind of makes sense how that all works. Then over here, Demeter, the goddess of Agriculture is coming from Georgia, which means agriculture. This makes sense. Demeter is providing 5% increased national dualoi output and minus 50% agroctime construction cost. And this is, by the way, the farm building in settlements. So many buildings in settlements actually have construction cost reductions in my tech tree. So this will make the agroctimes cheaper to build. It'll be 50 gold instead of 100 gold. So this is nice to get before you do too much building. Then, over on this side, let's progress over here. We've got Triarchos, which again means sort of the captain of a ship, with 20% increased Triares discipline. This is next to Lemboi, which means sort of smaller ships. So you've got your Gieres morale, sort of similar to the Siloi over here. Again, you're supporting your smaller contingent of your navy instead of your army. Poseidon with minus 50% fabricate claim cost and minus 100% no CB war cost. Don't get too excited, because the way that this actually plays out is this reduces the no CB war cost from 500 authority, which is very expensive, to 50 authority. So it's still an expensive action to take, but it's now a lot less expensive. And I have changed it from its previous stability cost, as stability is not meant to be in the mod anymore. So just wanted to note that. Next to Poseidon is Isotelea with plus 5% native culture metoikoi happiness and minus 50% recruit foreigner cost. This is the often overlooked character action you can do with members of another country's court. Whenever you can find them somehow in the interface, you can ask them to join your country and become one of your politicians. So if for some reason you want to do that, you can do that more cheaply with Isotelea. Next to this is Dionysos with a minus 50% entice foreign general and entice foreign governor cost. Dionysos is all about temptation and excess, so you're going to be tempting away these important politicians from other countries. Enticing a foreign general can change the course of a war. Just ask Alcibiades in the real-life Peloponnesian War. And enticing a foreign governor can dramatically change the layout of a map, even in peacetime. So pretty strong, though very situational character interactions you can make use of. Then is Hephaestus with plus 5% national culture Thetis happiness. This is the god of smithing after all, so the Thetis are all about him. And minus 50% Orikeo construction cost. This is the mine building in settlements. And the Akarotima is all about food. The Orikeo is all about tax and trade routes. This is a merged commerce and economy, or tax economy building. You can see, by the way, that the mine building is then mirrored over here with the farm building. Again, this is why this took so long, was I was creating this giant symmetrical tech tree in this way, where everything rhymes with each other. Going down to the next layer. In the center is Heros, which means sort of the heroic figures of Greek myth. This is plus 5% politis output. So the output modifiers are not culture-based, and I don't think they can be. I don't think there is a modifier in the code for native culture-only output. But the output modifiers are national, sort of like how the dualoi output modifiers are national. And minus 50% extol reputation cost. This is the expensive action you can take to increase the popularity and loyalty of a character that you're trying to, for example, set up as the new likely leader. And then over here is Liturgia with minus 50% bribe cost, very, very useful for loyalty management, and plus 5% national politis output. Moving over to the right this time, we go to enemies, who I noted earlier, with 100% more naval range and plus 10% Triares defense. Next to him is Sin Triarchoi, basically the sort of the subordinate captains. This is 20% more Navy morale recovery, which alongside Thalamioi and Thalassoporon is going to be giving you 50% Navy morale recovery total. And of course, this is mirrored over here with Sin Tagma doing something similar with both Time and Hoplan. I find that the morale recovery tends to be a pretty boring mechanic. You're just waiting around for your morale to tick back up, and I don't mind having really oversized, dramatic modifiers for it, because at the end of the day, the most interesting parts of this game, I think, are about planning and about reacting to things, and not about waiting around and hoping morale recovers fast enough to do what you want to do. So this contributes to a faster pace for the game, which is a big part of this mod. Moving along, there is Hyperesia, which is coming from either Triarchos. Actually, it's coming just from Triarchos, as does Syntriarchoi, obviously, as does Hermes, obviously. But it also requires either Poseidon or Isoteleia. Isoteleia, by the way, basically means equal rights for foreigners. So this is something that you would get that would make it easier to bring foreigners to your land. Hyperesia is increasing Tri-Rays offense by 10%. And then over here is Isogore, which basically means the equal right to sort of be a public speaker. And this requires Isoteleia and then also requires either Poseidon or Dionysos. This is going to be providing your first plus 100% max research capacity bonus, a very, very important tech to get in order to secure a permanent increase to your MRC, as well as another plus 10% national Metoikoi output. And by the way, the happiness modifiers for the different pops is meant to add up to 25, and the output modifiers is adding up to 50, because happiness has a cap of 100, output doesn't have a cap. So I wanted to make sure that the happiness wasn't over the top, but I want to make sure that the output felt powerful and worth getting. Then over here is Aphrodite, with 10% increased export value and plus 10% national Thetes output. Moving over to the other side of the tech tree, we now have Athena, with 5% increased levy size multiplier and plus 10% hostility defense. This mirrors how Hermes is a reapplication of the naval range part of Thalassoporon. Athena is a reapplication of the levy size part of Hoplon. Next to Athena, and Athena, by the way, requires Phalanx, and then is also requiring Seloi or Zeus, because Athena, of course, was literally born out of Zeus's head, and alternatively could be developed as an idea from the idea of, a mixed army of hoplite and other kinds of forces, because Athena is the goddess of strategy. And then I mentioned earlier Syntagma, which is your remaining 20% of army morale recovery to get to 50% total. This is requiring Phalanx, because of course Syntagma is the system of different lines of hoplite cycling in and out of combat, and it requires Phalanx and also either Ares or Seloi. Then is Ziphe, which basically means swords. This requires Phalanx and also requires either Euthena or Ares, and is providing plus 10% hoplite offense. By the way, the offense and defense modifiers for both hoplite and Tri-Race is adding up to 25, with 10% from this fourth row down, 10% from the second row down, and then the last 5% from the top tech. So that's the way that it works on both sides of the mirror. Then over here is Thesmoi, which basically means sort of written laws, plus 100% maximum research capacity, and plus 10% Adastoi output nationally as well. Finally, Artemis over here with plus 10% supply limit and plus 5% national Dwaloi happiness. And I believe that's actually all of the gods in the tech tree. So I've got all 12 gods in here at different spots, mirrored with each other in the same places of the tech tree on either side of the division in the middle. Coming down to the fifth layer of the 9 layers total, there is in the center Musake with national polities output plus 5%, and Koregia with national polities output plus 5%. Over to the left is Gymnastike with national manpower plus 10%, and next to it is Polyarchia with plus 25% siege ability and assault ability. Basically, I have merged all of the siegecraft techs into one single tech and given it a ton of power, so you really want to get down here if you want to do lots of sieging, which you likely will want to do. So this is a very important sort of middle point of the military tech tree area to get to this. And of course, Gymnastike requires Athena and is also going to require either Syntagma or Heros. And then Polyarchia requires Syntagma and either requires Ziphe or Athena. Lastly, Takayosun, which basically means justice, requires Thesmoi. Obviously, justice requires written laws. And then it requires either Ziphe or Syntagma. And this is increasing your national Adastoi output by 10% further, and also reduces enact laws cost, which is going to cost authority, by 50%. And I'm working on the laws in the background. Over here, way over here, is Parthenia, which means virginity. This reduces your national unrest by 1 and increases Dwaloi happiness by 5%. You can imagine why that might happen. And essentially this represents the Hellenic respect for and notion of virginity, specifically in women. And this requires Artemis, who is a goddess of virginity, and a goddess special to virgins, specifically virgin girls and women. And it requires either Demeter, a goddess of fertility, or Hera, a goddess of female chastity. So you can kind of see how this all flows into this. And then, in one of the most cynical and sort of notable mirror moments, we have the inverse of virginity over here with porneia, which basically means prostitution. So this also reduces national unrest by 1 and increases Thetis output by 10%. So you basically reduce your unrest by celebrating the virginity of your daughters, or by allowing people to have sex with people's daughters. So that's the two sides of the coin of civilization right there. So very interesting, and this is one of the funnier moments of the mere idea for this tech tree, kind of resulting in some fun social commentary. But porneia requires Aphrodite. Unsurprisingly, Aphrodite is a goddess of sexuality, and requires either Dionysus or Hephaestus. So again, partying. I guess I'm not. What's the reason? I guess Hephaestus is like not likely to have lots of riz, so he has to, he has to pay the price. But either way, let's not think about this too hard. Moving down to the 6th layer, we start in the middle with the tech that comes directly from Politeia, Trigodia, which requires Musike or Choregia. And Trigodia unlocks the Theatron city building and increases national polity's output by 10%. So the Theatron is the mirror building to the Boletarion. So you can see, by the way, the tech that unlocks the Boletarion then unlocks the Theatron. And the Theatron increases native culture happiness instead of same alignment happiness. So this tends to be a bit less strong than same alignment, because most of your pops are going to be your same alignment, but only some are going to be your native culture. But this is another large source of happiness that is nice to get eventually. And then to the left is Paidotrebe, which requires Logistikos and then also Gymnastike or Musike. The Paidotrebes were teachers of gymnastics and music, so Gymnastike and Musike leading into Paidotrebos, either one, alongside Logistikos because they're teachers and they're sort of experts and specialists. This makes sense. This adds 100% increased maximum research capacity and minus 0.50% statesmanship decay, helpful for keeping all of your characters who are not in office from losing all their statesmanship. Over to the right is Rhetorique, which requires Theoroi. Remember, Theoroi are the sort of sacred envoys being sent between the city-states to each other, so that's why there's a control and dip range bonus from that. This then evolves into Rhetorique as an art, which is increasing your monthly statesmanship by 0.50% and your max research capacity by 100%. So this increases everybody's statesmanship by 0.50%. Quite a strong bonus, to be completely honest, as being a officer is providing, I think, 0.25% for most positions. Let me check real quick. Oh, I actually didn't. I need to fix that. I'll fix that in a hot fix. My officers don't seem to be gaining any statesmanship. Whoops. Discovering mistakes as I do the video. That's fun, but very, very minor issue. I will fix it in a later patch. But either way, Rhetorique will be providing everybody statesmanship. And then this is requiring, by the way, Theoroi, as noted earlier, and it also requires either Choregia or Toikarkoi. And Toikarkoi, by the way, basically means... hold on. I think I actually missed these ones over here. Toikarkoi is increasing ship damage done by 25%. Basically represents the sort of overseers of the rowers. And then Epipetai, which means marines, reduces ship damage taken by 25%. And then Metoikon increases Metoikoi output by 10% and reduces send insult cost by 50%. You can kind of see how these all line up together. Yeah, I did miss this 3. Either way, Rhetorique requires either Korogoi, which is the tax on sort of choruses and chorus leading, and Toikarkoi, which is overseers. This leads to, alongside Theoroi, the idea of rhetoric. Okay, over here is Nyoroi, which is going to unlock the Nyoirion city building and increases your ship capture chance by 10%. I think it's 5%, or I think it's actually technically 6% by default before any other modifiers. The Nyoirion is the ship recruit speed, like sort of dry docks building, but that also provides a bunch of monthly food. So worth noting, you get that from there. To the right of that is Thumile, which increases your Metoikoi output by an additional 10%, and reduces your Thumile construction cost by 50%. This is the shrine building. You can build, this is the only building actually alongside forts you can build in both cities and in settlements, although you can only build one in the settlements, as settlements have only one building slot, but in cities you can build up to 5 for the pop simulation bonus. Then is Zeneca, which basically means the tax on the trade of goods for Metoikoi. This requires Metoikwan, which is the tax on Metoikoi, and it also requires Thalamioi. So, just wanted to note that. I guess technically, if you have, looking at it now, if you have Metoikwan, you would already have Thalamioi because of the way that the tech tree is laid out. But it looks nice to have this line here, so I don't know if I'm going to change that. Maybe I will change that, but I may make some minor changes to this tech tree. Very, very minor structural changes. But the structure of this tech tree, as I've mentioned before, took a long time to set up, so I'm hesitant to make any big changes. This is increasing your import value by 10%, and your Metoikoi output by another 10%. Over here is Banao Soy, my old name for the Thetis, and this is going to be providing a 25% reduced build time and a 10% increase Thetis output. This requires Prostrates as well as Porne. Then over here is Hectamoroi, which basically means sort of demotion or losing your status. This requires Porne for obvious reasons. This gives you a pop demotion speed of +1 and a plus 10% Thetis output. Over here, we've got, where was I? Pyrotribe, which I talked about a moment ago. And then Akros Polis, which unlocks the Acropolis city building and also adds +4 national fort infrastructure capacity. Remember that the Acropolis provides +4 fort level, so that fort capacity means every single province can support one Acropolis with no more fort capacity loss or gain, and +50% local fort defense. So this is a very strong defensive building for any city. And then next to Akros Polis is Kome, which is your Adastoi output +10%, and the Kome construction cost reduction. This is mirroring the Thumile, and the Kome is the village building. This is providing pop realignment speed for settlements. Can't build this in cities because you can't build a village in a city normally. Maybe people have done that before, but not in classical Hellas. You can build these in settlements. This is your most reliable way to realign areas of new territories to be your country's alignment. And the tech that makes it cheaper is mirrored with the tech for the Thumile that makes it cheaper. Next to Kome is Atimia, which is providing -0.25 monthly ambition and +10% Adastoi output. Now, this actually cancels out the ambition gain from Politea, which will be quite nice, as ambition is going to gain more and more gradually over the course of a campaign as other modifiers stack up. So you definitely want to be careful about letting ambition get out of control, as ambition is going to be increasing characters' statesmanship, but also their wages and their popularity. You need to be careful about that. So this allows you to clamp down on Politea a little bit. And it makes sense, by the way, that because Politea means sort of like politics, that developing Politea would give everybody more ambition, but developing Atimia, which basically means the stripping away of status from people in a formal sense, would be reducing ambition and increasing Adastoi output. Over here is Adanos, which basically means the loans that slave owners can give to their slaves to help them become free. This reduces monthly wages by 10% and +5% national Dwaloi happiness. This requires Sophrosine and Parthenia, because again, self-restraint is going to be leading to this kind of benevolence. Not that a slave owner is very benevolent, but as a matter of scale. Lastly, over here is Sesaktea, which increases pop promotion speed by +1 and national Dwaloi happiness by +5%. This basically means sort of emancipation or manumission for slaves. Then coming down to the 7th layer, again, the right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I was right about that. We've got the two kinds of plays that developed from the Trigodia. The Satiroi, which requires Trigodia, this basically means sort of satire. This is where the word comes from. It was originally called a satyr play, like satyrs, like the goat men, but that's where the word satire comes from, is the Satiroi. This requires Trigodia, and then either Pyrotribe or Musike. These are more musical, festive, and kind of more more kind of politically charged in many ways than the Trigodia. And then over here is the Komoidia, which is coming from Trigodia and requires Corregia or rhetoric. And like Musicae and Corregia, these only provide a straight-up national polities output. Polities are your most important population type. They're your plurality population type most of the time. And they're providing a mix of all of the important resources. So I don't mind having a few texts that are just polities bonuses without any other modifiers included here. As you can see, it's not like I have a lack of diversity of modifiers on display in this tech tree. Next to Satiroi is Skopoi, which requires Gymnasticae, and then also Acrospolis or Pyrotribe. This is going to reduce your fort maintenance by another 10%, so you're now at a minus 20% fort maintenance if you've been counting. If you go back up to the sheet by just doing this, fort maintenance from Logisticos, and then fort maintenance from Skopoi. There we go. And then next, and Skopoi, by the way, basically means like watchman. Next to Skopoi is Aracontes, which means sort of former Aracons or leaders. This comes from Kome, again, villages. And then it requires Acrospolis or Atimia. And this is going to be increasing your popular alignment speed by another +1, so a total of +2 once you include Arate. And also national Arastoy output +10%. Next to this is More, which reduces your army maintenance by 50% and enables the creation of More in the capital region. This basically unlocks legions, and this is something where, because Lacedaemon already starts with More, they still benefit from the 50% reduced army maintenance cost. Everybody else mostly would want this for the More mechanic. This will allow you to create your More with different sort of compositions that you choose. Next to it is Grafai, which basically means the kind of prosecution of politicians, and accordingly its modifier is prosecute cost minus 50%. This is coming from Adanos and Atimia. And then over here, Chorus Oikintes, which basically means freed slaves, comes from Sasakdea, which again means sort of manumission or the freeing of a slave, and Adanos, the loan to do so. This is increasing your national dweller happiness by 5% and adds +10% population capacity because you now have more people who need their own living spaces. And it also unlocks the Perioque city building, basically early versions of apartments. And these are going to be a tax economy strengthening building because you have more people who are paying the liturgia, as well as adding 50 population capacity, 1 per territory, and it's a city building, of course. This is all mirrored over here by Treyarchia, which reduces your navy maintenance by another 10%. This is different than Treyarchos, which means the captain of a trirees. This is the actual, essentially the sort of the corporate board who is in charge of funding the navy. So this obviously is a navy maintenance reduction modifier. And then sort of like with fort maintenance, this at this point would be, you'd be at a negative 20%. This plus over here, Techne. Next to it is Naoi, which requires Thumalai, and then, which you can remember is the different shrines, and then it requires also Neorii or Zeneca. And this unlocks the Naus city building, the Temple city building, which is your big pomp assimilation building, similar to the, actually there is no similar thing for it, as there is no big alignment changing building in this mod, but this allows you to assimilate a city very quickly because the building is so expensive and because its modifier only is useful in a place that has cultural diversity. I think I decided that there's not likely to be times where you need to super quickly realign a city, and I just didn't think a building made as much sense for that. But assimilation is a larger concern, as there's a lot of subcultures, and if you conquer a new city, assimilating everybody to be your native culture is more important typically than making them your same alignment. Anyways, over here is Isphora with a 10% increased national tax and national commerce income bonus. This comes directly from Zeneca, which again is that sort of import-export tax on Metoikoi, so now you're just taxing everybody. You figured out how to run a modern society there. Next to it is Lamani, which unlocks the Lamani city building and provides +1 province import routes for every single province. The Lamani city building is basically this sort of harbor building that provides 100% increased local monthly food modifier and +5 local based storage. This does not require a an actual, for it to be a sea tile, I don't believe. Yeah, I believe you can build this anywhere. So I guess it's not technically a harbor. Maybe it is a harbor, but don't worry about it. It's just a big market, basically. That is the idea. And of course, as I talked about in my previous dev diary where I talked about the building changes, this is meant to be a stronger version of the Agora. Next to this is Krematistai, which is going to be unlocking the Criterio city building and increases ship recruit speed by 20%, and Thetes output by 10% everywhere. So the Criterio is the stronger version of the sort of forge building, and it's going to be giving you 5 base resources. That's a lot of exporting and some extra supply limit, 50% more. This is going to unlock that building. Finally, we're in the home stretch down on the 8th layer with Philos Sophia. There it is, with 25% increased research speed, which is going to be the going to require both Pyrotrebe and Satiroi, which I think is a pretty accurate way to think about it, where philosophy comes from the idea of teaching and also sort of satire, or kind of being sort of sardonic and contemplative about society, so that leads to Philosophia. Next to it is Utopia, 5% increased native culture happiness for everybody. This is coming from Komodia and Laterik. Komodia, or comedy, is not exactly how modern sort of the genre of comedy works. Greek comedy is more about kind of heroic tales and kind of cause and effect, for lack of a better term. Like, sometimes Greek comedies are funny, but they're often more about a point, like they're saying a person suffers consequences for their actions, or they don't suffer them, right? So Komodia and rhetoric together lead to the idea of utopia, of being in this good place, so they result in this native culture happiness bonus. Over here, Misthophoroi provides you 1 max Merc army limit. Now, I will be adding in more priorities in a future patch that reintroduce the Justify Misthophoroi priority that I have tried to have for a long time. This will be where you finally are able to stop relying on that to use Mercs, and you have 1 Merc army capacity by default. Until then, no Merc army capacity from any other source except for the upcoming Justify Misthophoroi priority. Next to it is Eusebia, which provides -3 national unrest. This, alongside Parthenia and Porne, is going to be giving you a total of -5 national unrest, which will be quite nice, as if you don't remember, in my mod, what unrest is doing is reducing provincial loyalty, but also population output. So unrest is a pretty nasty negative modifier on output. So getting that unrest down, even if you get the happiness up and you just have a little bit of unrest, is quite nice. Right, moving along is Nomo Philakai, which basically means the responsibility of the nobles, as the nobles understand it, to safeguard the laws. This comes directly from Moray, and also requires Grafe or Arcontes. And this increases your threshold for civil war by 25%. You have 25% by default, so this is going to be doubling your civil war threshold, so you're not likely to have civil wars as easily unless you really mismanage your population of characters. Though as ambition and popularity are affecting character loyalty, this may still be a problem in the late game. That'll be interesting. Next to it is Autarkeia, which increases your gold monthly food modifier by 20%. This is paired with the food bonus from all the way up here, so you're looking at a 25% total food bonus from the tech tree, which offsets, by the way, the cultural research at 25 levels, which again is the sort of soft cap I've designed this around. So again, everything has been very carefully designed here and thought through at length. Next to Autarkeia is Xenalesia, which basically means sort of exile. So this increases loyalty of characters by +5, as no one wants to experience this, and it comes from Cores Ocontes and Grafe. Over here, we've got Semoriai, which reduces your navy maintenance by 30%. This is basically the sort of the executive group of people that run the Navy and pay for it. So this, plus the other Navy maintenance modifiers, gives you a total of 50% reduced naval maintenance by the end of the tech tree, though this is very, very deep down. Navy maintenance, of course, being a major source of expense for anyone with a large navy, although most of the city-states don't have any navies at all. It's really just Atenai, Corinthos, and Corcyra that are the big naval powers in contention, though Argos also will have a moderate navy as well. And a few others too. Lacedaemon honestly does have a small navy too. But moving on, we've got Skepsis, which reduces Challenge the Cult's cost by 100%. if you don't recall, Challenge the Cults is an action you can take, which causes you to spend 12 authority to reduce your cult influence by 1 per month. And during that time, Challenge the Cults is more expensive. This allows you to do it for free, or at least for a cheaper cost. The way that this sort of 100% works is a little confusing sometimes, but it's meant to be for free. So by the time you get this, Challenge the Cults just becomes a cooldown you can select without any cost associated to help you control cult influence later in the game. Moving along is Isonomia with plus 10% maximum Splendor. This just is a great tech to get because Splendor, if you don't remember, increases a location's tax and commerce economy strength just directly, and Splendor is a very difficult modifier to increase on its maximum level. Now, it's meant to be increased mainly through missions, but this is one of the rare times you can get a Splendor cap increase from another source. Telone, which basically means tax collectors, gives you minus 30% monthly wages for characters. This, again, with the other character wage modifiers, is going to add up to a total of minus 50%. A lot of these numbers I've sort of thought through how they total up. Next to it is Capaloi, or sort of merchants, and this is going to be adding plus 10 capital import routes, which could be valuable, but is mostly going to be good for the plus 5 sort of guaranteed surpluses you're going to be getting for your capital. This allows even a small city-state that doesn't have a lot of trade potential, as trade potential is mostly coming from your pops, to compete with larger city-states in terms of their surplus modifiers. Then we finally get to the 9th layer of the tech tree and the bottom 5. Now, these 5 techs are the strongest techs of the tech tree, and I put a lot of thought into how to replicate, how to kind of sort of represent this in my merged tech tree. These 5 techs actually represent the 5 states, or the 5 kinds of governments that Aristotle actually describes in, or excuse me, Plato describes in his Republic. And these 5, let me check my sources here. I don't want to get this one wrong. I believe it's called the 5 regimes. Yeah, this is from Plato. I think Aristotle also talks about this, though. Anyways, this is from the Republic. This is Plato's 5 regimes. And the 5 regimes are Tyrannus, or tyranny, Oligarchia, or oligarchy, Aristocratia, or aristocracy, Timocratia, or sort of a plutocracy, sort of rule by the wealthy, and Democratia, or democracy. Now, in terms of where they are in the tree, Aristocratia is at the bottom of the politis section, not because all politis believe in aristocracy as an idea, but because the idea of aristocracy is going to come from ultimately the development of the politis over the classical age, where it's this idea that rule should be with the best. That's what aristocracy means, is rule by the most worthy, or the best people to rule, which essentially, in a modern sense, would sort of be like a meritocracy. Like, that's kind of the idea. And so Aristocratia requires Philosophia and Utopia, and provides plus 2 monthly ruler popularity, a very powerful modifier for anyone with a long-standing ruler, and even for like oligarchies, or even for democracies with your 1-year cycling rulers. This still gives you some fairly brisk ruler strengthening while they are in power. So, very good stuff. Over here, Oligarchia requires Eusebia and Misthophoroi, and allows for plus 1 global settlement build slots. This is sort of like the tech in the vanilla game, where you can either get a bunch of building bonuses, or you get the bonus that every settlement can have 2 buildings. That's what this is doing. So essentially with Oligarchia to represent the strengthening of the oligarchs and their sort of out-of-the-city estates, sort of like what the Romans had, this is allowing for every single settlement to have a build capacity of 2, which is otherwise not a modifier you can get from any other source. Tyrannus is providing plus 25% Dwaloi output. This is because the Dwaloi are going to... Hold on. Yeah, so the Dwaloi output bonuses up here are half the strength, normally, of the output bonuses over here for the other types. I'm in the wrong spot. The other types of pops. And so this is basically giving the Dwaloi the remaining 25% boost, because their output doesn't count happiness, so their output's stronger. So this basically, so once you have all 100 techs, every pop type will have plus 25% happiness and plus 50% output. So this is just providing the remainder for the Dwaloi, because Dwaloi output is more weighted than other kinds because it's not modified by happiness. Over here is Timokratia, which is going to provide your remainder minus 30% fort maintenance. A very important, again, very, very important source of expense reduction for everybody. So even people without big fleets, like Atenai is unusually stronger fleet-wise than other, city-states. But everyone is going to be paying enormous amounts of fort maintenance all the time as you expand, so this is going to be quite nice to keep that under control. And this is then your last final source of fort maintenance to get to 50% total. Lastly, Demokratia plus 25% foreign culture group happiness. Foreign culture group actually has a minus 25% happiness by default, so this actually just erases that. And this, along with the erasure of the 5% foreign culture happiness that they have with the plus 5% from Prostratus, once you get this, basically everybody has the same base happiness, regardless of their status as native, foreign, or foreign culture group. So that's what Demokratia is doing. And as you can see, these different sort of final texts they're not one or the other, right? There's no need to pick one and not do the other. You can get all of them if you want. And they represent your nation developing these ideas of these different kinds of regimes, not necessarily changing your regime to be like it, but to basically implement these ideas into your current regime. So again, these are based off of the 5 Platonic regimes. Again, I'm sorry for initially thinking they were from Aristotle. Aristotle wrote a lot about politics, so I've done a lot of research about these things recently, so I get them all mixed up. But that wraps up my breathless overview of the merged technology tree. This is an enormous addition to my mod, but it also represents a big subtraction as the other tech trees are gone, as I mentioned before. But I think this tech tree, as you can see, more than makes up for what has been removed, because it is punching above its weight. Each of these techs is meant to be a strong and important modifier that you would want to consider getting for most strategies. And so, with all that noted, that wraps up this development diary. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.